Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, subscribe to our channel. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. I woke up to silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not like when snow falls or the power's out. No. This was the kind of silence that makes you sit up in bed, sweating before your feet even hit the floor. It felt wrong. I looked out the window, and all I could see was fog. Thick, gray, motionless. It clung to the yard like a living thing, not rolling or drifting, just sitting there, heavy and still. I thought maybe it was just early, but when I checked my phone, it said 9:27 a.m. No sun. No birds. No distant sound of cars on Route 19. Just the fog. I live in a small town called Coldwater, population under 3,000. Not the kind of place where things happen. Not the kind of place people even remember exists unless they're driving through. But that morning, it was like the rest of the world had forgotten us completely. I went downstairs. My dog Bear usually scratches at the door first thing in the morning, but he was lying flat against the kitchen floor, ears pinned back, trembling. I'd never seen him like that. When I opened the back door, he bolted to the basement and wouldn't come out. That's when I noticed the first thing that really rattled me. The fog didn't move. It wasn't mist curling over the grass or drifting through the trees. It was a wall. I stepped out onto the porch, and it didn't shift or fade. I swear it stopped right at the porch steps, like it had been measured and poured. That was when I started hearing it. Faint, far away, a voice. Just one at first. Low, like someone whispering behind the glass. It didn't make sense. I couldn't catch the words. But then another started, louder, closer. A man's voice. "I'm sorry, I should have stopped it." I turned my head. No one was there. Then another voice, this time a woman. "Please, come home. Please." I didn't mean to leave. I backed into the house and shut the door. It was too early to panic, right? Maybe it was a weird weather thing. Maybe temperature inversion or something. The kind of stuff they talk about in documentaries. I tried calling my mom, but the phone just gave me a dead tone. I tried Facebook. It wouldn't load. Wi-Fi was connected, but nothing came through. No apps, no messages, no signal. I turned on the TV, flipping through the local channels until one came on. A black screen with white text. "Please remain indoors. Do not engage with the voices." That was it. No anchor, no emergency alert siren, just those words, looping every 30 seconds. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, trying to understand if this was a joke, if I was dreaming. I tried pinching my arm, splashing cold water on my face. Nothing changed. And then came the knock at the door. 3 slow knocks. I froze. My heart started hammering, and not because I was scared someone was there. I was scared someone could be there. I opened the door just enough to peek out. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Carmichael. She was in her robe, barefoot, standing halfway in the fog. Her eyes were wide, locked on something I couldn't see. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. I called to her. She didn't respond. Then, with terrifying calm, she stepped fully into the fog. I rushed out, yelling for her. I reached her just past the edge of my yard, and she collapsed in my arms. Her eyes were still open. Her mouth, too, frozen. I dragged her back inside, heart pounding, and laid her on the couch. Her skin was cold. Her chest moved like she was breathing, but it didn't look right. Like her lungs weren't expanding, just twitching. That's when I noticed it. On the inside of her arm, just above the elbow, someone had written a word. Or maybe it had been scratched into her skin. Not bleeding, just raw, like it had been written with a dull knife. Liar. I backed away, trying not to scream. Then my phone buzzed. It was the first time it had done anything all morning. One notification, one message. from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it. "Don't breathe it in. Mark." I dropped the phone. Mark has been dead for 7 years. I didn't pick the phone back up right away. I just stared at it, lying there on the kitchen tile like it had bitten me. Mark? My older brother, 7 years gone. Drunk driver. Closed casket. We buried him on a cold October morning that still wakes me up sometimes. And now, a message. Simple, chilling. Don't breathe it in. I finally forced myself to crouch down and grab the phone again. No signal, no bars. The message had no timestamp, no sender name, just the number 00000. I tried calling it. Nothing. I tried texting back. "Mark?" It didn't send. Then the screen flickered. Just once. A brief static ripple, like old tube TVs used to do. And then it went black. The phone was dead. It wouldn't turn back on. In the living room, Mrs. Carmichael still lay on the couch, breathing. Kind of. But her mouth was still open in that horrible, wordless scream. Her eyes never blinked. It felt like something was watching us through her. I covered her with a blanket. I didn't know what else to do. Outside, the fog hadn't moved. Not an inch. It held steady like a painted backdrop, a silent curtain of pale gray that wrapped around the town and sealed us in. That's when I started wondering how far it went. So I turned on the emergency radio my dad left me when he moved to Florida. He always said, "One day that thing will be worth more than the house." I used to laugh. I wasn't laughing now. I flipped through static until I landed on a weak signal, a man's voice, thin and distorted. "If you can hear this, please stay inside." The fog appears localized to a 12-square-mile region encompassing Coldwater. Satellite imagery confirms total coverage. Attempts to enter have failed. We are still... The message looped. Attempts to enter have failed. But really was just us? Just Coldwater? Then something new came through the radio. I didn't touch the dial. The signal shifted on its own, warbling as though something else was pressing through. "You said you'd be there?" It was Mark's voice. No distortion, no delay. "You said you'd come home." I turned the radio off and threw it under the table. The silence afterward was worse. My thoughts raced. What did he mean? Don't breathe it in? I hadn't. Not directly. I kept the doors shut, the windows sealed. But what about Carmichael? Had she gone out into the fog, followed those whispers? I remembered the way she stood, limp and staring, like something had reached into her and pulled out whatever made her. I knew I needed help. If the town was sealed off, then others had to know. Someone else had to be awake, aware, maybe scared like I was. I grabbed my coat, a dust mask from under the sink, and my father's old flashlight. Then I headed for the door. I paused. I left Bear in the basement, a bowl of food and water beside him. He didn't look up when I whispered to him. He just kept staring at the concrete wall, trembling. I stepped outside. This time, the fog did shift. Not like air currents, more like a ripple through water. And then, I heard it again. Dozens of voices, all around me. Some laughing, some crying, some begging, and some just saying names over and over. "Ellie, Ellie, Ellie, don't be scared. I forgive you, I forgive you. I forgave you. I never told you. Don't turn around. Don't look at me." I moved fast, down the porch steps, past Carmichael's garden, onto the sidewalk. The fog pressed in on all sides, but never touched me, like it bent around some invisible barrier. I didn't question it, I just ran. Down the street, I saw movement. A figure, maybe two. As I got closer, I realized it was Brandon Hooper, a classmate of mine from high school. He was kneeling in the street with his hands over his ears, rocking back and forth. "Brandon!" I called out. He didn't look up. I knelt beside him, grabbing his shoulder. His skin was clammy. his eyes bloodshot. He whispered one thing, over and over. I heard her. I heard her. I heard her. She forgave me. But I didn't want it. And then, loud and sudden, he looked me dead in the eye and screamed. She wasn't dead. I stumbled back, heart racing. And that's when the fog spoke my name. Not a voice I knew. Not Mark. Something deeper, hungrier, right in my ear. You should have died with him. I don't know how long I sat there on the cold pavement, just staring at Brandon as he trembled and whispered. The world around me felt like it was fading into the fog, as if I were losing touch with everything familiar. My breath fogged in front of me, thick and unnatural, like I was exhaling into something that wasn't just air. Then there was a voice. Not from Brandon, not from the mist. It was from inside my own head. They didn't tell you. You thought they'd been lying. I stood up, too quickly. My vision swayed, and the fog seemed to ripple in waves, shifting like liquid. What? I whispered aloud, my pulse hammering in my chest. You thought it was just an accident. He didn't want to die. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the ground, as if the mist had wrapped around my legs and was pulling me into it. But you left him. I tried to shake it off. I had to get away from here. Brandon wasn't making sense. The fog wasn't making sense. But the whispers, those horrible whispers, they weren't stopping. And somehow I knew it was worse than just the fog. This was something that remembered us. It knew what we had done, what we had left behind. My eyes drifted back to Brandon. He wasn't looking at me anymore. His face was turned to the street, but his mouth still moved, silent screams slipping between his lips like broken glass. He was repeating something. I heard her. She was alive. She's still alive. I could see the faintest flicker in his eyes, something raw and desperate. He wasn't himself anymore. Whatever this fog was, it had taken him. It was taking us, slowly, piece by piece. And then, the faintest crackling came from my pocket. My phone, now dead, had somehow turned itself back on. The screen flickered to life again, one message flashing on the display. Don't breathe it in. They are waiting for you. The screen went black again. Who was waiting for me? I looked at Brandon one last time. He wasn't shaken anymore. He just stood up, his movements unnaturally stiff. His gaze met mine, and for a split second, I saw something familiar. The kid I used to know in high school. But then, his lips curled into a smile that wasn't his. You can't leave, Ellie. They won't let you leave. I stepped back. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. Brandon, you have to. But before I could finish, he moved. Faster than I thought possible, he lunged forward, his hands locking around my arms with a force that made my bones groan. His grip was like ice. Don't fight it, you're already in, they know you now. I didn't even think. I pulled myself free from his grip and ran. I ran without looking back. The fog closed in on me, its tendrils brushing my skin like fingertips. It wanted me. I could feel it in every corner of my mind, in the very air I was breathing. There was no escape. I sprinted through the streets, dodging the mist, but it seemed to follow me, wrapping itself tighter around my every movement. I thought I saw shadows in the fog, figures, people, faces. Some of them were familiar, people I had known, people I had left behind. But when I reached the edge of town, there was no exit. The fog had folded in, making everything impossible to see. The streets I had run down twisted and curved back on itself, like a never-ending loop. I turned. I couldn't stop. My body refused to stop, to give in. I ran until I thought my lungs would explode. The fog pulsed around me. The voices whispered louder, harsher. You didn't believe, but they believed you were coming. They've been waiting for you, Ellie. I tripped and fell to my knees in the wet, chilled street. I gasped for air, but then Brian, Gummy, no force, Fort. Mom and Dad, I tripped and thrilled it. Mom and Dad, I tripped. She used to sing lullabies when I was little. Soft songs I barely remembered. Ellie, it's not your fault. Come home. You can come home now. I turned toward it, the voice calling me. It felt warm, so familiar, safe. And for a moment, I almost believed it. But then the fog began to shift again, and I realized something that stopped me cold. It wasn't her. But it wasn't her at all. It's already too late, Ellie. I felt my stomach lurch. My body went numb, and then I heard Mark's voice, a whisper this time, one I knew would haunt me forever. You can't leave. None of us can. The mist closed in, suffocating me. It wasn't just voices anymore. It was everything I'd ever known, coming for me, and I wasn't going to escape. That wraps up tonight's pasta. If your lights flicker, don't blame the wiring until the next shadow creeps in. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It helps more than you know. And if you liked the story, don't forget to hit the like button. In the comments below, share your own horror experience. I'll be reading after midnight. Good night. See you again tomorrow.